Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining Convos con Cathy. This is a people-powered campaign solely funded and powered by working class people like you and me. This is important because while other politicians are taking funds from real estate developers and police unions, aka Eric Adams, if you have not seen my last post on the Rojas for Mayor Instagram or Twitter, please take a second to look at that post. Um, And we, unlike the other politicians, will be beholden to only you if we take office. All funds will be used to help us disseminate our platform with pamphlets, flyers, merch, and promotions online and in newspapers. Please consider donating now by clicking the link in my bio. Today, we have the honor of being accompanied by Karla Reyes, who is a longtime teacher. She's been a teacher for, I believe, 10 years, right? 10 years?
This is my 11th year. You're
Wow.
11. You're 11.
Her 11th year in the Department of Education as a public school teacher. She is currently the union rep at her school. She has also been a union rep at other schools. She helps foster student activism at her school, and has a lot of experience organizing. Aside from that, Carla is an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and has been doing organizing with the organization for over 10 years as well, right? Over 10 years?
Yeah, I was a first year teacher when I joined the PSL.
Oh man, that's a lot. Becoming a teacher and an activist at the same time. We could do it all. All right. So, today we are going to be talking about school openings. So our schools, this is now the second week that New York City public schools have been open. Of course, like always, DeBlasio did not, listen to teachers about what we needed. The only thing that he kind of like did was like, oh, everybody, all of the staff needs to be vaccinated, right? But we said, okay, fine. We need also for students to be socially distant. We need for class sizes to be smaller. We need for the infrastructure of the buildings to be safe. We need proper ventilation. We need masks. We need antibacterial. All of these things. We need weekly testing of all people. But of course, we were completely and totally ignored. There is no school I don't think that I've heard of. I can't imagine that there is a school in New York City where people are, where students, teachers, whatever, are able to distance by 3 feet. And the mandate is really like, to be socially distant by 3 feet as much as possible. And then
Right.
it's like, all right, well, I have like 30 kids in a small room. It's not possible. And they're like, okay, so it's not possible. And it's like, okay, and there is no vaccine mandate for students, right? But we also know that people that are vaccinated can and are getting COVID. They just their symptoms are much lesser. And we're basically being, our lives, our students' lives, the students' families' lives are being put at risk, right? We're not receiving any hazard pay like we asked. They haven't even stipulated how time off is gonna work. If a family member's sick, if you're sick. So there's a lot of things going on right now. And then also the remote option, right? That's something that we've been fighting for a very long time, for there to be a remote option. And there isn't one. Talk to us a little bit about that fight, Carla.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot happening on different fronts, and I think one of the main things we have to think about is the fight last year and what's going on now. Last year, our memorandum of understanding, which, if you don't know about unions, you kind of like outline, like, okay, what's going to happen for this time period, right? Like, here's our agreements. The agreements from last year had weekly testing of 20% of the students, of everyone,
Mm-hmm.
actually, not even just students. It was like everyone in the building, 20% every single week, and it was
Mm-hmm.
randomized. And it was one of that simple. I mean, it sounds simple, but that little piece of agreement really allowed us to know who was sick when, and then they could quarantine and isolate, and be able to, like, not infect other people and really keep the workers and the students and the families, everyone safe.
Right.
But that was kind of one of the first things to go out from this year. There was also a lot more protections around, like, when you get infected and getting tested, and not losing days and benefits, as a worker. And then for students too, there was well, remote learning, which apparently now you're not allowed to say remote anymore in the Department of Education. It's like a digital learning platform now.
Oh my
Can't say
God.
remote, but you got to use this other phrase.
They may have
Um,
made a contract with someone that now is selling them
right.
digital learning instead of remote learning. So now they want to
Or
see that word.
Right, or remote is triggering or something. Like, it brings up too many bad memories. So you got to use this, like, new digital learning platform. So it seems
What's
like you're still
triggering
working.
is the lack of actually care for our communities, for our students, the lack of resources, the fact that many students are going into schools with infrastructure that's crumbling, without proper ventilation, without windows. That's triggering, not the actual remote word.
Exactly. There's, like, so many more things that need to be done to keep, like, our students and to keep, like, our children safe. Like, right, like, if you look at the pediatric ICUs around the country, like, they're full. They're full with young people, with children who have COVID-19, the Delta variant, and they're suffering from it. They're dying from it. And New York City hasn't hit that place just yet, but school just reopened. And what did we see in the last week? Over 600 classrooms, like, are shut down. Like, I forget how many, like, schools have been impacted. One school is all completely shut down in East Harlem.
Mm,
And like, immediately the mayor, what he did yesterday was, first he acquiesced to the union, because the union started demanding, like, all right, you got
mm,
to do weekly testing. It's still only 10%, but it's weekly now. So he's listening in some way. But then on the flip side, he was like, well, you don't have to quarantine if you've been exposed, if you are vaccinated and unvaccinated, right? And here's, like, the little catch with that is, like, a young person, if they basically have to prove, like, hey, have you been in 3 feet of this other person? So, like, teachers are now becoming contact tracers. So not only are we, like, looking out for the mental health of these students, are we
mm,
communicating with families, are we kind of getting our students by with, like, all the stuff that they have to do, like coming back into, like, in person, being on
mm-hmm.
crowded subways. We have to, like,
Wearing
look,
their mask all day.
wear the mask all day, telling students all day long, pull up your mask, like, all
Mm,
those little things that we have to do all day long. On top of that, we have to, like, be contact tracers and try to
mm.
remember who was around this kid. Are they 3 feet? Were they distanced? It's just unrealistic, to put these guidelines and put families and students and teachers at risk.
Yes, and at every level we see how the mayor, the governor, they don't have any foresight, you know? Like literally they wait until our children are in the hospitals to make the decisions that we've been telling them to make. And throughout the whole time they're telling us, and in the media, when we're literally risking our lives, we're the ones feeding our kids, right? A lot of teachers I know in my school were involved in the food delivery drive that we did, that we literally just finished recently. We're literally grievance counselors for them when their family members pass away because of COVID. We're looking for rental assistance for them. We're doing their fund excluded workers application. Like we're literally looking and keeping our communities alive. Teachers are keeping communities alive. And DeBlasio and all of New York City governance acts as though we don't know anything. Like we're just complainers. Like the reason we want a remote option is because we don't want to work. And it's like, no, actually, we were one of the few workforces that worked throughout the entire pandemic. I talked to so many of my friends and they were like, well, it was really nice to have a break. Obviously they were like, oh, COVID was terrible, but it was nice to have it. And I'm like, I can't relate. I cannot relate because we didn't have one. We had to work more. We were calling Spectrum to get our students Wi-Fi because the city failed to do that. We were the backbone of our communities, right? And then they still refused to listen to us until they put our families in danger. Now let's look at, now we're seeing a lot of young kids in the hospital, but who's most impacted, right? People who are immune compromised, right? So people that have issues like asthma. who has asthma in New York City? If we look at who has asthma in New York City, we see that the South Bronx has higher rates of asthma. The South Bronx is a more working class, is known to be a more working class community of Blacks and Latinos, right? But then if we look by race in New York City, Black children are at a 10% higher rate of having asthma than white children. Latino children are at a close to 7% higher rate of having asthma than white children. So who are we really putting at risk, right? It's working class people of color, because our kids, because of the communities that we live in, because of, environmental racism, our communities are the communities that are going to be most devastated, and our children are going to have the highest risk of having very harsh reactions to COVID-19, and our children are going to be the ones in the hospital and possibly, God forbid, passing away. And we are fighting for their lives, but at every turn they act like we are literally like asking for too much.
So I love what you're saying, Cathy. In Buffalo, New York, there's a socialist candidate for mayor, India Walton, and she, I don't know, I'm not gonna lie, I was just looking at her in Twitter and stuff, and she was writing about how the people closest to the problem are the ones who should be looked to for solutions, right?
Yes.
And so the working class, the workers, the poor folks in the city are looked at as like recipients, as like the victims,
Yes,
all the time. And then, but you're talking about like, okay, who was making the phone calls? Who was organizing the mutual aid, right? Like, who's looking out and creating creative solutions and doing a lot of the organizing work around having a remote option for immunocompromised families, right? That's working class and poor people who are doing those things, but it completely gets ignored by like the politicians and the higher ups. DeBlasio, has he been in a school? Is he a teacher? Like, if he spends 1 week in these schools, he'll see how overcrowded they are. There's no 3 feet distancing, right?
it's impossible. There's not even 1 foot distancing. It's literally shoulder to shoulder. Like, you have to sit like this with the kids have to sit touching each other's shoulder to fit in the classroom.
Have you been around high schoolers? They're tall, they're big, like they take up
They
space.
love hugging each other,
like they hang out in the hallways, and to eat, right? Because like, where's there to eat? They don't want to hang out in certain places. They might go outside, right? Like there's no space for them, and all these considerations aren't taking place. But all you have to do is spend a week in a school to understand. Like, if you're around little children, they hug you, they touch you. Mm-hmm. That's who they are, right? They're figuring out who they are as little people, right. And not being conscientious of all the factors at play to keep them safe, and also ignoring the people who are closest to the problems telling you what the solutions are, doesn't make any sense, and is not a representative democracy, right? Because there's people in action trying to like activate a democracy here in New York. Like, there's organizing happening, but it's not being amplified because we don't have the resources to make it bigger, right? We only have the resources that exist in our like localized areas, and like that, we can't create change like that, right? Like, it might be great for one school who's figuring it out, but what about like the schools in the South Bronx, right, that have like really high rates of asthma? What's going on there? What about in Queens, where you have entire schools with like major undocumented populations, right? Like, what happens there? So there's a lot that we have to be fighting for. And I know as socialists, the part of what we're doing is fighting for everything at the same time, right? That's why we're fighting to like really upend capitalism and really establish a whole new system. Now I'm going on a socialist rant, but like, it's also connected when we talk about schools, because you said this earlier, like, teachers were the ones who carried the burden of this, and now we're being framed as the enemies, right? So like, first we were heroes, then first we were heroes for like a month, right? When they needed us, we were heroes for a month, and then all of a sudden we became complainers, whiners, people who didn't want to work, just doing this for the money. Like, it's a job. You know how many teachers actually?
Trust me, we're not doing this for the money, because if you saw our paychecks.
Right. Well, so many people have left. Like today.
Well, there was a study that showed, that teachers is like one of the is like the career option where you're required to have a master's degree, and it's like the least paying career option, the lowest paying career option with master's degree. And a lot of that is because it's gendered, right? Most teachers are predominantly women, right? And they devalue our work. I mean, even if you hear the media talk about us, it's like if we're just childcare, that's it.
I mean, and that's why it's also so important to keep schools open fully, right? Like there was no question, like there was like a bulldozing effect around the
Mm-hmm.
country. Like, all right, we're going in, we're keeping schools open no matter what. Oh, 600 classrooms closed. Well, let's change the rule so that these
Right.
classrooms don't close and keep schools open. And what's happening is that teachers are leaving the profession. We've seen that happen around the country. Today, at the UFT meeting, it was announced 6,000 new teachers were hired, and a lot more teachers are looking into early retirement and they're looking into leaving because it's too much, and it's unfair when we're told, "Oh, do it for the kids," because that's what
Mm-hmm.
we've been doing, right? Like that's what we've been doing. All the work that teachers do outside of work is for because we love our kids, right? We
Right.
love our children. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but also like there's only so many hits you can take to your dignity.
Yes, exactly. And we need to be respected as much as private industries respected, right? Private industry workers. They, even when they were home, they were receiving like checks to help them pay for their electricity, all of these things. We didn't have any of that. But if we even just look at their buildings, right? How is it so that the private industry, right? They have brand new buildings with huge windows, AC, ventilation systems. I mean, there's empty luxury buildings of office space throughout New York City, right? But they don't have the money. They don't have the money to fix the schools. And the reason for that is because we live in an economy that only prioritizes what creates profit for the rich, and anything that's about public interest, about our livelihood, about our humanity is not worth anything to them. And that's why it's important for those people in power to change. And the main point of our campaign, the first point of our campaign, is tax the rich. Like AOC's dress. Those of you that like the, I know it was problematic. I get it. But we need to tax the rich. This is the richest city in the country. If not, it could even be it's one of the richest cities in the world. We have the most amount of millionaires and billionaires. The money is here, and we are creating it. Our students will create it when they grow up. Their families are creating it, and therefore we need a safe place to work, and our students need a safe place to study. And if they have money to be creating all these luxury office spaces, they should be having money to create all of these luxury school buildings for our students to work safely, and for us to work safely. And I mean, it's just blatant disrespect at this point. It's been over a year. We were working, our butts off, taking care of entire communities. We were ignored. We continue to be ignored until our own kids are in hospitals. We had to wait until children were overflowing hospitals for anyone to even listen to us. And we weren't offered. We're basically risking our lives, the lives of our families, to be there. We don't have any hazard pay. We don't have anything. And all they say is a thank you, but there's no salary increase. you know um yeah, I mean, it's just really it's easy to see why so many teachers are leaving the profession. I mean, even if I talk to my students, they're like, why do you teach? Like, that the paycheck is you know what I mean? It's just it's a lot, and we do it for the love. But at the end of the day, we can't pour from an empty cup. And every day the DOE makes our cup more and more and more empty. And
Mhm.
all we're asking for is for our cup to be full, because when our cup is full, the cups of our students are full. If we have a safe place to work, students have a safe place to learn.
Yeah. You said so much, Cathy. I want to say like 3 things to what you said. Like I was like, you were going, and I was like, yes, yes, yes. Okay. 1, the AOC dress. Anybody who still thinks that was problematic, I'm like, how many people Google text rich after that, and like are
Yeah.
actually like it's like yeah, like that hot take wasn't even worth going into. Y'all just being a little sexist about her